All right, I think we're live here. So good evening, Facebook. Good evening, everyone. Really good to be here with you from what can only be described as the Holocaust Educational Trust's North London office in these times of social isolation. That also means my house. I'm Ben Fuller. I'm one of the education officers at the Trust, and I'm going to speak to you a little bit about Schindler's List and take some of the questions that have come in during the week, and hopefully some of the live questions that are going to come in too. Just to introduce who we are, the Holocaust Educational Trust is a charity based in London, devoted to educating about the Holocaust to people from every background and all communities across the UK. We go out to schools, universities, and other community events right across the country to hopefully raise awareness and develop understanding of the Holocaust for all. You can find out lots more about us if you visit our website, www.het.org.uk, where all of our programs are located on there. So do have a look if you haven't seen us before. What we're aiming to do with this particular event is look to unpack some of the questions around Holocaust film, specifically Schindler's List today. The audience we're trying to reach is anywhere from, mid-secondary age students right through to sort of A-level, degree level, whatever, and beyond into the general public. So everyone is welcome to be here. You're all welcome to take part and ask questions. And I'll try and answer questions from a sort of a range of the different types of groups that we think we've got on board with us today. I'll just give a quick sort of précis of what the film is about and where it came from and what the impact it's had, as well as a little bit of the debate, and then we'll start digging into some of the questions that are coming in that I can see on a screen I have just over here as well. Schindler's List is a film directed by Steven Spielberg based on a book called Schindler's Ark, which was published in 1982. The film came out in the UK in 1994, but really I think it's one of those films that has stood the test of time pretty well, and seems to be and is still very much considered an important film. So we want to discuss a bit of why it's considered important. I think most of us, if you're interested in film at all, you probably heard about Steven Spielberg for films like Jaws, Indiana Jones, Jurassic Park, the real kind of epics. And in a way, Schindler's List is another one of those that, as some might see it. But it's a film that also addresses the Holocaust in a way that perhaps no film had done up until this point. And as a result, it was hugely well received in the public. I'd say it kind of raised our consciousness and understanding of what the Holocaust was as a general public throughout the Western world. And also won a ton of awards. I think 7 Oscars, which isn't bad going, and a whole range of others. So it's got a lot of impact. And it's a film that's built around survivor testimony to a large extent. Steven Spielberg did an awful lot of research with survivors before creating the film. So a lot of the scenes and sort of segments within the film reflect and are representations of things that happened to people during the Holocaust. And it, I think it's important to say it tells the story of someone who saved lives, which we need to hear about. We need to know that the Holocaust was an event that had a huge array of different things happening, and for every single person involved, there's a story there. And this is an important part of the story. It also has the strength that it portrays in a very realistic way what ghetto life looked like to an extent, what camp looked like to an extent, although again, every ghetto, every camp was different, and the stories that one person portrays are going to be different for another person in another place and another place. And so whilst it has all of these kind of strengths that really feed into the story, there's a lot of contention critically that it doesn't represent the Holocaust very well, and that there are problems that we need to address. So for starters, we have to acknowledge the fact it's a work of fiction. And as a film, it's, by a big Hollywood studio, major Hollywood director who is very good at creating an epic piece with a neat beginning, middle, and end. It reflects those other films in that way, but it's presented almost like it's telling a story fact for fact, and there are inaccuracies which might come up in some of the questions, and I can go over a little bit in more detail as that comes up. It's also an issue that is raised often, is that it simplifies the story. Oskar Schindler was not quite so simple as a character as we see in the film. He certainly wasn't as involved with the list of Jews that were saved as it suggests. The reality was he maybe knew a handful of those people, but he didn't actually stand over someone else typing out the list as it suggests in the film. So there's some difficult inaccuracies that when you realize them, they maybe change the tone of how you see the film in its entirety. And the final thing I'm going to say before I go to questions is that we can't watch the Schindler's List film and say we know the Holocaust. It gives us a representation of one part of a hugely broad story. And I think one of the difficulties that people have had before is that they dwell on the film as a means of learning about the Holocaust rather than a means of introducing ideas about the Holocaust. So in terms of how we might use it in a classroom, there are segments of the film that can be useful as a doorway through to further discussion and further research, but it's not a film that gives us answers. It's not a place to go to find the answer. Okay, I'm going to have a look at a couple of questions and see where we're at with them. Someone asked, this was Narinda asked, what happened to the girl in the red dress? And I noticed, I was looking on the Facebook earlier and how the conversation has already started around this, that someone else pointed out that, there's a book called The Girl in the Red Dress that exists and is available to buy. That's a memoir of a girl who was in the Krakow ghetto, who was known for wearing a red dress, but is not the person that Spielberg is trying to represent in the film. He said himself that the red dress was to stand out in a way that the Holocaust stood out to the Allied forces during the war. It was something that no one could miss. You couldn't look in that direction without seeing it. Your eye was drawn to it, and yet he says, but the Allies did nothing. So he wanted this red dress little girl walking through the streets of Krakow, who later on is seen as a victim who's died, to be a kind of to make a point about the lack of action that he felt came from the Allied sort of forces to try and combat what was happening to the Jews during the war. So the girl in the red dress in the film was a victim. The girl in the red dress in reality, who is a different person with a different story entirely, survived, and there's a memoir that you can find of her. Okay, another question, if I may. I see there are lots of fictional films and books set during the Holocaust. What are your views on this? Is this subject ever the right place for fiction? That's a challenging question, and I think that we have to, where we acknowledge that it's fiction, where it's presented as fiction, and gives us an opportunity to explore further, but not assume that we're looking at something that is fact, then I think that fiction has a strong place in Holocaust sort of understanding, learning, and can be used educationally. I think generally art is a powerful way of representing things that are very, very difficult to represent. I think it's not probably a starting point for me. I think an understanding of the events of the Holocaust is really important in order to let the art do its work and be interpretive. I don't think we can go into something we don't know about and start interpreting from art. But when we have the opportunity to look into art and see how people have represented their experience of the Holocaust, or even perceived experience of the Holocaust, I think that can be really, really a powerful thing. Okay, let's have a look at another question. How far does the film deviate from actual events, says Jane? Thanks for the question, Jane. Well, it deviates quite a bit, is the reality. I'll give you a few examples to sort of help show that it is a film, it is Hollywood, and it wants to have a nice round story, and therefore Spielberg and the writers decided to kind of pare the story down a bit. So a key actor, a key part in the film, Ben Kingsley playing Itzhak Stern. Itzhak Stern was the accountant for Oskar Schindler, but the character that's created in the film is more a composite of a range of people. So the influence that Stern had has been kind of magnified by just making it simpler to have one character who does all of this stuff rather than multiple people. So even there was kind of Nazis in the office of Goethe, Armin Goethe, the concentration camp commandant, who sort of helped in a way for Schindler to get hold of names and make the bribes necessary. There was other people involved. So Stern is an interesting example of the simplification of the story in the film. Another example might be that we could look at the character Marcel Goldberg, who is who kind of pops up at various points in the film. At the very beginning, he's someone who's doing black market trading. Then he joins the Jewish police force inside the ghetto, and then at the end we see him as one of the people who survives in the camp and is one of the Schindler Jews. He was actually quite instrumental, but that kind of black market trading was something that he carried through. He was one of the people more involved with writing the list than Oskar Schindler himself, and he took bribes from people to get them onto the list. So a very complex character, someone that I think would be really interesting to have explored more in the film. And again, it comes back to this sort of critique that there's an oversimplification. It's good Jews and bad Nazis, and there is no in between. And the fact that a character could have that kind of complexity where they are saving one person, but what's the impact of that on others, and taking bribes and all of those kind of things. There's some interesting stuff to look into there. I think it might be, some will consider it a shame that the film doesn't address. Also, just Schindler himself is a deeply complex character, and the idea that he had this kind of sort of moment of clarity as he stood over the Krakow ghetto as it was being liquidated, that didn't happen. He wasn't there when the liquidation happened, and his sort of change of heart and his softening that he went through, leading him to save those people, began and ended over a much longer period of time. So yeah, it's fair to say that it's based on historical events, and that the breadth of the story is okay, how sort of has accuracy, but the minutiae and the details have been simplified for the benefit of the story and of the film. Okay, we'll have another question here. Okay, I'm going to look at this one. I'm just going to have to read it on my computer screen here. Kate, a guide from Krakow for a UK UK-based tour company. We find that whilst not accurate, watching the film helps our students visualize what went on and understand themes and decisions that were made for people so far removed from the Holocaust, and find that a useful tool. Okay, so thank you for that message. I think that's a really important way that we can use this film and other Holocaust films as a source of some visualization, although I'd kind of back that up by saying that we can't visualize, we can't step into those shoes, and we would never encourage anyone to do something like that. But to give us a sense of, I think that, yeah, there's value. Again, as I think I mentioned earlier, I'd probably encourage people to watch films like this off the back of developing their understanding of the Holocaust, rather than as the sort of introduction to. But yeah, there's definitely value in the sense that the location and some of the structures and some of the ways that things are organized in the film do present a relatively realistic and something that we can in the present day sort of use to help visualize as far as is possible. Okay, let's have a look at another question. Is the film a good learning tool if it focuses on Auschwitz and not the killing of Jews outside of the camp system? This is based on a comment by Brendan. So thank you for the comment. Yeah, I think this is one of the key areas where we have to acknowledge that no film can kind of provide us with a full understanding of the Holocaust. I don't think we need to criticize Spielberg for choosing the setting that he chose or anything like that. It's a story as part of a broader whole. But it does, again, maybe as a teaching tool, it does push us towards that kind of Auschwitz-centric model of camp, the concentration camp being the Holocaust. And the reality is that, up to half of the victims of the Holocaust weren't murdered in camps and ghettos. There was a whole other various other means of the extermination of the Jews that the Nazis undertook, from the murder by bullets, more often in Eastern Europe, to the gas chambers, to the ghettos and summary executions, but also the horrific living conditions that inculcated disease and starvation, to, at the end, the kind of what's sometimes known as the Holocaust by neglect, where camp inmates were essentially marched back into main sort of central Germany and left to die in concentration camps like Bergen-Belsen. So there's a whole, this is one part of a huge story. It has its use as a film to kind of feed into understanding part of the story, but it can't be sort of the story. I think if we kind of use if we get the idea that Schindler's List is the Holocaust, then we're kind of very, very far from reality and not using it in the right way. Okay, I think we've got a few more minutes, so I'll go for another question. And this is an interesting one from Kijing Go on Facebook. Says, is the notion of a good Nazi relevant morally? Wow, that's a really tricky one. I think I'm going to answer the question in a bit of a cheeky way with a question, if you'll forgive me, because I think the real issue with something like this is single framework arguments or single ways of defining a person or a group. Humans don't work like that. So the reality that someone can be good in one person's eyes but evil in another person's eyes is how the world works. I'll give you an example of the commandant of Auschwitz, Rudolf Höss, who was clearly working sort of in a what most people would describe as sort of for the forces of evil. He was overseeing the murder of over 1 million people, and he was very proud of his work. And for that, the natural terms that we might use for someone like that is monster, evil, crazy. The list goes on. But to his children, he was a loving, kind, generous father. And I think that when we dig into characters and look for that complexity, that's where we see humanity. Sometimes when we see some of those elements of humanity, it's very challenging for us. It's not what we want to see, but it's worth kind of going further than just looking for the good versus evil argument that perhaps some have criticized Schindler's List for portraying, and saying there's more to it than that. Not to say that evil doesn't exist, it does, but it's there's a complexity. So any one of the characters in the film has the potential to be in a range of places depending on the viewpoint of the viewer. Okay, there's another question coming in here. And I'm just going to try and work out which question it is. Like I said, first time, guys, so I'm doing my best here for you. Someone's just typed it up for me. Okay, great. Oh no, that's the one we've just had, I think. Oh no, I saw it in the cinema in Milton Keynes. I remember that as the credits started, no one moved. Everyone just sat in their complete silence until the last credit had gone. Never experienced that in a cinema before. This is a comment from Willow on Twitter, so thank you for your comment. I think it's a really interesting thing that there is a reverence towards this film, and that it's clearly a deeply moving picture. And even from a critical standpoint, I think that it's hard not to find it moving, and it, as someone who, you know, I've rewatched it in the lead up to this, it still holds you absolutely still and to attention. So I think maybe that speaks to the power of the subject matter, the power of the cinematography, and all of those things. I suppose, kind of coming back to that kind of educational side of things, we want to reflect on that impact and think, why has it left me feeling that way? What do I need to sort of reflect on about the contents of the film? What can I discover more about? And perhaps, like, just to sort of tie it back to the start, to remind ourselves that yes, this is a work of fiction, and so however moving it is, and the reality that it's portraying, we want to sort of bear that in mind. And for me, as a sort of Holocaust historian, I want to go and research further from there. I don't want to leave it. I love to watch these films to see what it can illuminate for me, to discover more about, rather than necessarily to say, okay, I've watched that, now I understand it. Okay, I think I'm getting told my other computer to wrap this up. So just worth mentioning that we will intend to do this more. So thank you to everyone who's sort of engaged with us on this. We'd love to hear your thoughts, further questions that you may have about Holocaust film generally, and recommendations for films that you'd like us to sort of have a look at and talk about with you. You can follow us on most of the socials. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. So if you search for the Holocaust Educational Trust on any of those platforms, then you'll find our presence. And we'd really love you to get on board following us and keeping up to date with what we're doing. And of course, there's the website, www.het.org.uk. So please do go and have a look there. Sign up for the newsletters. Obviously, in these strange and changing times, we want to be kind of getting out there and engaging with you in new ways. And so if you're aware of what we're doing, and if you're communicating with us, then we'd really love to hear what your thoughts are. Just seen someone suggesting Zoom as a platform, and I think that could potentially be something in the future. We definitely are looking into those kinds of things, so keep those suggestions coming. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care. You all need to go have your daily exercise now outside while the sun's still shining, and then stay indoors, stay safe, wash your hands. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.